Hello once again. This episode addresses a unique and awful reality that survivors of suicide face. That reality is feeling judged, blamed, or shamed regarding the suicide of their loved one. Now, despite the fact that survivors of suicide are virtually always shocked by a loved one taking his or her life, other people will sometimes question whether overtly or indirectly, did the survivors bear some responsibility for the suicidal act of the deceased person? And most commonly, survivors can be the worst offenders of this false assumption towards themselves. We are the most likely to assign the blame to ourselves. Many grieving the loss of a loved one will have a sense of guilt and/or responsibility for the death. They often say, "I should have seen this coming," or "I knew I should have made him get proper care." It's very common to question ourselves depending on the circumstances, of course. Survivors of suicide often take this type of thinking to an entirely different level. They scour their memories, looking for ways that they might have interceded to prevent that death. And they typically search for anything, even the smallest clue, that their loved one had signaled their desperation and hopelessness. But it was missed. "I see it now. He was calling out for help and I didn't pay close enough attention. There were so many clues. I should have seen it and done something more." But what about you? Are you taking on a responsibility that really isn't yours to carry? Are you convinced that your lack of attentiveness or concern is a key component that led to your loved one's suicide? Or maybe you are already aware that there was, in all reality, no reasonable way for you to have predicted or prevented the suicidal act, yet you feel the judgment from others. Maybe someone has asked you a question like, "So, didn't you have any idea that she would kill herself?" While this might possibly seem an innocent, if insensitive, question to ask, one could easily infer that the question is tinged with blame. You could interpret the question as suggesting that you should have seen it coming, and if you had seen it coming, you could have done something to prevent it. Well, probably not. These are some awful questions to ponder. Could I somehow have saved my loved one? Was I really so inattentive and uncaring that I callously let him die in despair? If you're thinking this way, it might be impossible for me, at least right now, to break through that shroud of guilt and remorse draped over you right now. Nothing I say to you at this moment will likely change the trajectory of your grief. I do understand that much. Only you can release yourself from the bonds of guilt and shame. Yet, and I want you to know this, never in my experience to date, nor in my research of this topic, nor in any of my training, have I come across a suicide in which a survivor is the responsible party for the death. I don't believe such responsibility to be a viable conclusion ever. And yet, never have I either come across a survivor who didn't at least seriously question himself or herself about holding some responsibility for the suicide or ponder repeatedly how they might have predicted and prevented it. Some level of self-examination is common for most survivors. Is that true for you? If so, you may carry a sense of guilt or failure for a while that is not easily dispelled. Nursing a sense of guilt or failure creates a significant obstacle to healing. You alone must conclude the truth of that matter. And this is the truth, that one person cannot commit an act of suicide upon another person. Your loved one's death was a suicide. It was not a homicide. You couldn't save him, nor are you responsible for his decision and action. When you can fully grasp that reality, which may take you quite a while, and you can exonerate yourself of responsibility for another person's actions, you will have removed a primary obstacle from your path of grieving and healing. All right, we're going to wrap up this episode, but I want you to take away the following for consideration. Shame and blame are commonplace for survivors of suicide. Survivors are often their own harshest accusers. Self-doubt and guilt are obstacles to healing, and only you can release yourself from the bonds of guilt and/or perceived failure. As always, I want to leave you a stepping stone. If you can summon the courage, I would challenge you to write a letter to your loved one explaining your feelings of responsibility for not predicting or preventing their death. Then I want you to file that letter away and put a note in your calendar to reread it in 30 days. When you do read it again, I want you to ask yourself if your feelings have actually changed in any way. What is different and why? And then repeat as necessary. Reflection. I wrote this today. Our human inclination to assign ourselves responsibility for things that are beyond our control, that's worth pondering. How much influence and control do we really hold over others, or even ourselves? Perhaps we deserve neither credit nor blame. In any case, thank you for tuning in again and considering my thoughts on shame and blame as they relate to suicide. I hope to share more thoughts with you sometime soon. Tune in for more information about being a survivor of suicide. Be well.